In this video, we're going to be looking at how to get a model prepared in Maya for use in Substance Painter. It's not a super complicated process, but you have to make sure you do it right. Otherwise, things just don't function correctly when you're working in Substance. The first thing you need to make sure, in this case we have a model, by the way, I'm sorry, kind of doing this out of order. I have a model of a staff for a fantasy character. If we go in here and take a look at the UVs, what you want to see here is a couple different things. You want to see a nice clean UV layout, which we don't actually quite have here, and you need to do a little bit of cleanup. You can see I already know that these are all scaled proportionally to each other. And I have them organized somewhat in terms of what's connected to what. So these three things here are these three things here. You can do the UVs however you want, but I like to keep them somewhat clean. If you're just going to work in one UDIM, not a big deal. If you're going to start working in multiple UDIMs, so multiple squares here, what I would recommend is anything that's of the same material. It will help you if you keep that material in one section. So if you're doing a character and you have a lot of skin, you'd want to keep all the skin UVs in one section. Otherwise, when Substance renders it out for you and exports the textures, it's going to export multiple UDIMs for every material you make, and it's a huge pain in the butt. So keep like materials in the same UDIM. And again, in this case, I can get all materials from this object into one UDIM. So I'm going to take a second and clean that up, and then we'll move on from there. Okay, UDIMs are a little bit more tidy. Again, I forgot to mention the reason why I like things to be close together. In the old days, being able to paint on them in Photoshop or something like that was nice. But mostly it's just for identification purposes. So when I'm looking at the model, if I'm going through these things here, they actually make sequential sense. And so I can find things much easier when I'm trying to figure out what UDIM does what. Other than that, everyone has their own system here, and I'll leave that to another video. Although I suppose I should mention that it's also good to have a little bit of distance between each one. You don't need a ton. Like I like these to be a little bit less tight, but these distances in here are pretty good. The reason why is when you're in Substance and it outputs the texture, it'll do a bleed from the edge of this object out just to cover any sort of gaps or cracks in your model, and ultimately that bleed just as a safety. But if they're too close, you won't get much of a bleed, and then you don't get much of a safety. So like here, these are pretty tight. Be nice to have a little bit more space there. I do want to do a quick cleanup on the model, so I'm just going to do an edit delete by type history. Normally I just have a button for it. For the sake of the video, I'll show it. Normally you would want your transformations frozen, just to zero everything out. And probably center your pivot wherever you think it's best. I'm going to leave it here because this is already animated. I don't want to mess with the pivot. And then we want to name things. Naming is really important in Substance. If you don't name things, it won't actually transfer the UVs correctly, assuming you want to update them later. And it also needs to know whether they're low poly or high poly. So I'm actually going to separate these out for now. I could leave them together and just group them together, but what I do like to make sure I have is one top group node that I can grab everything with. So just makes it for easier exporting. So when you're trying to get all the stuff out here, you just grab that top node, export as an FBX, and you're good to go. If you have some other way to do it quickly and easily, that's fine too. Grabbing in the window is fine as well, as long as you don't have a complex object or something that's rigged that's going to be hard to grab everything. Whatever names that you have, I have this staff Pete and energy rail. I'm going to change these for now so that they're using the camel case, lowercase for the first word, uppercase for the second one. You can name things whatever you want. It doesn't matter. In this case, I just have the main staff, and then the energy rail thing is just this little piece on here, which I determined is called the energy rail. The different textures I have in here are just different materials I've added. We'll talk about that in just a minute. The important thing right now, though, is I need to identify this as a low poly or high poly version of the model. In this case, for it, I'm going to just do an underscore LP here for both of these. You could also do underscore low. That's the standard like this for substance. That's what it prefers, but you can technically make it whatever you want. I'm used to doing LP. If you have a lot of objects, this can get pretty obnoxious to add LP to each one. You can also just go into modify and prefix hierarchy names. I'm sorry, my bad. Modify and search and replace names. And in here, if you just put a $sign for search for, it'll just grab everything. Everything counts here. And replace with LP, it just will add this on to the end. It just kind of doesn't make sense, but I saw it in another video. Shout out to Dallas here in his How to Add a Suffix to Multiple Objects in Maya. Total lifesaver. You just put the $sign here, you put what you want to put at the end, replace with, and then just click on apply and it will add it to everything. I actually didn't need it to the first one, but I could have just selected these two, so I don't need it here. Only to actual models. The last thing we want to make sure we have set up here is we want to make sure that all our materials are correct. Substance Painter can only receive a Lambert shader out of Maya and function normally. So anything that you have set up in here, just as I have these color kind of placeholders here to help me kind of see the model itself or the design, those all need to be replaced with those Lamberts. You also want to kind of color code them for easy visibility. It'll also be something that Substance uses when it does color IDs if you want to use those for masking. So all things that are really important. Again, in this case, I picked a really simple model here. I only have 3 main materials. We have this main one for the staff. We have this one here, this sort of gold material for the various part designs here, and then same thing here at the bottom. You could technically do them all out of one material and then paint and mask them out, but this also really helps out with well, masking in Substance Painter. So it just makes your job a little faster if you can separate out things by material. The one downside to doing this is it's going to export each material separately, which makes applying the shader back later a little more annoying, especially with a very complicated setup. But it makes the painting part of it much, much faster and efficient. So here, again, I have, and this one's actually not currently being used, I have the staff blend 1, 2, and 3. They're blends. That's not what I want. I need 3 Lamberts. So I'm going to create a Lambert here. Hit G twice to repeat the last command so I can have 1, 2, 3 Lamberts. Whatever you title these here is exactly the title they're going to get in the texture set list in Lambert. So if the main material here is red metal, you can type in red metal and that will show up in the texture set list as red metal. It's up to you, whatever you name these things, but you want to name them something that we understand. It could also be staff main, accents. You can call them whatever you think is going to be easiest for you when you're working in Painter. I go back and forth between labeling them by what they are and between labeling the material. In this case, I'm going to call this, well, I'm going to call it staff main. I'm going to use camel case again. I'm just used to that here. And then give it a color. Doesn't matter what color it is. It can be whatever you want. What I'd recommend is something dramatic so we can see it very easily and different than the other colors that you pick. I'll call this, like I said before, gold accents. And then this last one, since it's a piece that's specific, I'll just call it, well, I'll call it what it is, energy rail. You might get issues naming things here the same things are named over here, but in this case, because it has the LP, it's different, but Maya likes unique names in general. So gold accents, we'll go ahead and just make those gold. Goldish or just bright yellow, so that again they stand out. And then the rail, I'll just choose a random other color. I'll do a purple. Again, it doesn't matter. This has no effect on anything. And then my job now is just to assign them to these parts here. There is no one way to get these on here. If I drag and drop it, it's not going to work so well because these are all combined into one piece. If they're separate, that would work just fine. But I don't want to have to separate these out again later. You could use your UVs, your UV editor here, to separate these pieces out. So I could select these shells here and apply texture. In fact, maybe I'll just do that. So what I could do is I'll just go ahead and drag and drop, middle mouse click, drag and drop to apply this all here. But since they're separated in the UVs, it's a pretty easy job to choose the different shells like this, since I know what they are. Now I can right click and choose assign material to selection, and now it will assign that to those accents really quickly and easily. And this one's another drag and drop. You can also grab faces and assign it that way. Anything that you like, any system that you know that can do this quickly and effectively. But the main important thing is these are the names that are going to come across into Substance, and they need to be distinct by the way that you want to paint. So quick review here. We just want a solid model. It can be several pieces. It can be one piece, whatever you want. You want everything in the object named, and named in a way that you're going to keep. If it's the low poly model, which is what you should be working on for initial export, it should have a underscore LP or underscore low to identify it as a lower poly version of the model. Personally for me, I like everything that history deleted, assuming it's not a rig, frozen transformations, and centered pivot, again depending on the model that you're actually working with. And of course you would want to make sure that your UVs are nice and tight. You can have multiple UDIMs if you want. My recommendation is similar materials should be in the same UDIMs together, but you can mix it up as well. In this case, I was able to get them all into one UDIM effectively. As long as they are proportionally correct in terms of their scale, you should be good to go. The final step here is to export as an FBX file. So I'm just going to click on my top group. If you want, again, you can select individual pieces or grab them in here. I'm going to go to File and Export Selection option box. The defaults here should work just fine, although you may have to choose file type FBX to make sure you're exporting the right thing. I'm going to hit Export Selection, and I'll choose where to save it. In this case, I have the folder that I've been working on in the model, Staff Pete. I'm going to actually make a new folder in here. So I'll call it Staff Pete Substance Prep. In this folder, I like to have a folder of typically the low poly version. And then if there's a high poly version for normal maps, you can put an HP for high poly. In this case, I don't have one, so I wouldn't need it, but that's what I would normally do. I could even have another folder for the models that are going to be the reference models from Maya, but in this case, I'm not worried about that. I have that in a separate place. So I'm just going to put this here, and then I'll just give it an appropriate name, Staff Pete. And I'll call this version 1. Oh, I did forget. I'm going to cancel this. I did forget. I do want to actually add the LP tag on there so I know which file it is at all times. So one more time. Since I know the options are good, I'm just going to hit the main button there. So it should go to the same place. Yep. So Staff Pete LP. The LP doesn't matter if it's on the end or not here, so I'll just do version 1. And then I often like, if it's the base file, the original one, I'll put base, just so if I make changes later, I know which one was the original. The only thing that we really need to do here, and for the setting, under geometry, you just want to make sure smooth mesh is clicked on. Under embed media, you want to make sure embed media is on. That will make sure it includes the textures that we just made, the Lambert textures. And I admit I don't know what it does, but I was told that referent assets content should also be checked on, so I've been keeping that on as well. But those are the settings that have been working out for me. I'm going to export as an FBX. The fact that I have other shaders in here that still exist is okay because I'm exporting these directly, so it's going to not export those additional shaders that I had left hanging out in there. If you're ever concerned though, you can just get rid of them. Not a big deal. So just double checking here. Here's my, in my Staff Peat folder, here's my Staff Peat Substance Prep. And in here I have my LP and HP folder. And there now is my FBX base file, ready to go. I should mention that occasionally you end up with errors in the FBX. Some of them are just warnings, some of them are errors. Errors could actually be a problem. Warnings aren't necessarily. If you do get an issue here, one thing you might consider trying under File and, where is it? Let's see, optimize scene size. Sometimes if you're working on a newer version of Substance and an older version of Maya, find that Maya will drop unknown nodes in the FBX file. If you go over here and just click on Optimize Now, it gets rid of those. That can help clean up any issues. Sometimes also exporting first as an OBJ will help clean the model up and get rid of any extra crap. And then you can re-import that in, do any additional cleaning you have to do, and then export again as an FBX. That often gets you a cleaner file. So you can kind of play around if you're getting issues when you try to import your FBX into Substance. Other than that though, we are ready to go. And now we can bring this over to Substance. Alright, so over in Substance, I'm going to choose New. And in here, you can do any template you want. In this case, I'm going to be using Redshift in Maya. So for this one, and if I'm ever unsure, honestly, I just choose the PBR. Again, you can always change it later. The same thing with your document resolution. If you go a little bit lower, you can work faster. A little bit higher, it looks better, obviously. This one's small enough and only have one UDIM, so I'm just going to do 2048. I want to make sure I have the UV tile workflow checked, especially if you're working with UDIMs. That'll make sure everything works well. And then go ahead and click on Select to pull in your file. Let's see here. This is props. And you can go right to our LP folder. There's the staff. And hit OK. And then it should generate all the necessary stuff. So you can double check and make sure it came in. If you get any errors at all, you probably want to go right, almost definitely want to go right back to Maya and just make sure that everything is as you meant it to be. We can see over here in the texture set list, I apologize for the size of this, just it's really tight in here to get everything in for 1920 by 1080, but you can see energy rail, gold accents, and staff main. It's not a bad idea to test these as well. I'd save it first or plan on doing stuff, but you could go in here and just grab any of the defaults and throw them on. And basically you just want to make sure they go on in the right location on here to make sure everything's functioning as you intended. So I'll click on staff main. I don't know why I'm doing metal rust, but let's just do it. Just, I guess it had the color. So cool, it went in the right place. The gold accents, I'm just going to throw on this metal polish. And again, you can see they automatically go in the correct locations. And then technically the energy rail is also the gold accent, but I plan on making changes there. But just for, again, to make sure it's clear, I'll throw in something different. I keep wanting to go over here and drop it. This should make that a thing. And then, of course, you can go in here and sort of check it out and see that it actually worked out. If you hold in Shift and right-click, you can move the light back and forth and kind of see how it's affecting the materials. But it's that fast just to get something going. And of course, if you know what you're doing in Painter, you can do whatever you want with these. The next step in Painter would be to create your maps. So that would be over here under your texture set settings. And again, I apologize for how tight this is in here. But if you scroll down, you should find the Bake Map section. So go ahead and click on Bake Map. And you would want to do this before you get too lost in painting or anything like that, because just your models are going to depend on these maps. So it's going to change the size of this a little bit. Here we go. So the main thing I want to focus on here, and actually I'll move this log down even further, or pull it out, that's fine for right now. The main thing I want to deal with is the mesh map settings here. So again, you can choose your output size to the maps. I'm going to go with 2K, 2048. Most of these settings I'm going to leave blank. If you did have a HP or a high poly version of your model, which I don't here, this is just low poly, you basically would do the same setup here with the high poly version. You would want to make sure the names here are identical. So if it's Staff Pete on the low poly version, you want it Staff Pete on the high poly version. The only difference here would be if this is the high poly version. And here I'll go ahead and make one. We'll call this fake high poly. The only difference here would be instead of saying LP, you want this to say HP for each model that you're going to be importing. So if you have a big model, this could be a whole lot of pieces. If any of the names don't match up even by a letter, the whole process doesn't work, at least on that one model. The shaders in the high poly version don't matter. In fact, you can have no shaders on any of it and it's okay. All it's pulling from the high poly version is the surface data and the detail that would be on here, like if you painted it or if you sculpted it in ZBrush or something like that. But the names and the HP have to be there, or if you prefer, high. In this case, since I don't have a high poly version, I'm instead going to click on the Use Low Poly Mesh as a High Poly Mesh. If you had a high poly mesh, you want to click on this folder right here, and you want to drive to whatever it is. Again, it would need to be an FBX that you exported, and then you would pull it in. I'm going to go ahead and do this just because it's nice to see, but in this case it would be faster and easier just to say the Use Low Poly as High Poly, be a bit more efficient. So again, I just resaved my low pass as a high pass. So if I go back here and go to my HP, you'll now see that version here. Again, any differences in the details would ultimately show up correctly, or would show up as a normal map on the low poly version after we bake these, which is great. Here it's going to do an approximation of the transfer. Basically, there is a front distance and a rear distance which you can lower or raise, and anything kind of within that range between the edge of the model and this are the details it's going to try to capture. So if it sticks way out here, you might need to make it a little bit bigger to capture all that detail. In this case, we can make it really tight because the low poly and the high poly one are the same version. So we're not going to get really much difference here. For a lot of you, you can just leave it at the default 0.01. That'll work just fine for you. Down here, we also want to make sure match is on by mesh name. This will always compare the mesh name of the low poly version with the mesh name of the high poly version and guarantee a perfect transfer. If you have it on always, it won't necessarily get the details from one to the next and might mistake one piece of the mesh from another. So we don't want to do that. The suffix is important. This has to match what we did in Maya. So this would be LP. Sorry, I keep hitting tab, which doesn't work here. HP for a high poly. You could, or you could leave it low and high and do those. We don't need to worry about that. Over here into the texture set list, we just want to make sure that each of them are selected, so all of them get maps made. And then over here, it tells you which maps it's going to bake. These are the basic ones. I would leave on most of these unless you know you don't need it. Some of you might want a height map if you're going to be painting details that need to physically get rendered away from there, or opacity if you need to do something that has something that's clear on it. In this case, I don't have any of those. I suppose I might do, I'm not going to do opacity. So once you're ready, you can go over here to the main window, and you have two choices here: either bake selected textures, the ones we have checked right here, or just bake one of them, the one that you would prefer to bake. In this case, it'll give you the choice of the one that's currently selected. I'm going to bake all of them because I want maps for all these guys. So here we go. And now it's going to go through the process of baking the different maps for the different parts. What this means is that as you're painting on here, you can start taking account of various things, the curvature, the thickness. Some of your tools that use in Substance require those models or those maps in order to accurately be able to paint on them. So at this point we should have all these maps for each one of our objects. I'm going to click on Return to Painting. We're not going to see a difference here because in this case none of these maps required those. None of these textures require those maps. In this case we haven't done anything to the map, so we should see little to no change here. But what you will see is you click on the different ones as now each one of them has the various maps here actually mapped out. You can always, can I pull this out? Nope, this is too small. You can always over here, try to get us a little more space. You can click on the X to ultimately get rid of any of these if you realize it's doing something weird, especially things like ambient occlusion can sometimes do weird stuff to your models. This one has a crease in the middle. Yep, there's a crack right here in the middle that's on purpose that might be showing up strangely because of one of these maps. Might be worth getting rid of, but for right now I'm going to leave it. At this point your model is ready to be painted on. I'm going to just save it out as a Substance Painter file, so save as. And again, this is under my props and staff. I'm going to make a new folder in here called Staff Substance, which is where I'm going to put all my Substance files. So Staff Pete Substance version 01. Now I can pass this off to anybody. They can work on it and paint on it. It is ready to go. The couple things you might want to check for are when you get the and here tab is helpful. I can get rid of all those menus. You do want to go through and look at the model after you've baked the maps and make sure they look okay. You might end up with some weird artifacts in there. In fact, I did. You can see this kind of oddness down here. That means that my normal map probably baked poorly. This probably is an occlusion map error. So anything like that that you see that you realize, ooh, that doesn't look good, those things will stick around. So you want to go back in and then recalculate maps for any areas that aren't getting the right look. I got some there as well. That's interesting. It could be because of my low poly, high poly cheat. What you can do to see which map is causing the problem is you can select the material, in this case the gold accent, and come over here, and in this case I think it's the normal map. I'm just going to get rid of it, and sure enough it gets rid of that issue. I'm still seeing an artifact there too, which might be ambient occlusion. Yep, sure was. You're not required of ambient occlusion, by the way, so if something's causing an issue with ambient occlusion, you can just chuck it. It's okay. This crack right here is probably because there's a crack in the, there's a separation in the UVs. That could be a permanent issue. So not a permanent one, but one that I need to address. I'm just going to click on the staff main and get rid of that ambient occlusion map too. It didn't affect that one or that one. And normal map here, nope. So I just have to recalculate those to see what's going on. What you have to do is keep recalculating maps until you get the version of your model that you think looks good to you. You can see the normal map kill fixed that one as well. One thing you can do with your normal maps, or with your mapping, is go back over here to your baked mesh maps. And what I would do is, often your selection is too big, that distance. So if you decrease that distance, you're likely to get a more accurate, as long as no details are popping through it, a more accurate representation of the model. As you have areas like this, where it's searching into other surfaces way past the edge of your model, you start to get weird issues. The the max rear distance is on the inside of the model. I would just match this 0.0031. You're likely to get a more consistent bake. So for this one, I'm just going to go ahead and rebake all these and see if that gets rid of some of the issues. So that will replace any ones that I deleted. I could also just select the ones that I need over here and just, again, only render the one I want. On a more complicated model, that rendering might take a while. So just running the one you need might be the better solution here. Let's see if it gets a better result. So this should now have a normal map. Let's see here. Oh, in the wrong place. So we have a normal map there again, and you can see we don't have the artifact there anymore. Let's see if we have it down here as well. Still have the artifact in there, which I'm not surprised. I cheated on that. And these also look better. Not perfect. There's some dots in there. That could be part of the texture itself. That looks much better. So again, you can keep working at this until you get the model looking the way you want. Then start painting. If you realize you made a mistake, you can always go back in and recalculate your maps. Substance is very forgiving in that regard. You can even do things like change UVs, although I've had various results, sometimes great, sometimes not so great. But that concludes how to get your Maya model prepped for Substance, exported as an FBX, imported and set up in Substance for painting.